When we think of philosophy, we often think of white men in Greece, Rome, and Western Europe sitting around reasoning about the world around them. We think of logic, debate, and the academy. Philosophy certainly shouldn't be tainted by mysticism, that is, by personal flashes of divine revelation. But the truth is, our rigid definition of philosophy as a strictly logical discipline is a new concept, largely born out of the Enlightenment. Centuries before, both in Europe and beyond, philosophy took different forms. The line between philosophy, theology, and mysticism were often blurred in ways that make them confounding today. But understanding this history is essential for truly appreciating the history of Western philosophy and incorporating pre-modern and non-Western thinkers into that appreciation. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the work of Ibn Tufayl, whose text Hayy ibn Yaqzan, a philosophical tale, perfectly captures the ethos of pre-modern philosophy. In this amazing work, Hayy ibn Yaqzan is a small child who finds himself on a deserted island. Defenseless and alone, he is raised by an antelope. Hayy learns from his adopted mother, and as he grows up, learns more about the world around him. Through a combination of scientific examination, introspective reasoning, and revelations, he develops a philosophical, scientific, and ethical system. The breadth of his personal studies are what truly make him exceptional. When animals around him die, he studies them, thus learning about biological mechanisms. Through careful reasoning, he comes to understand that all things have a cause. He too must have a cause, as must the world. This leads him towards monotheism and the belief in a creator. He becomes a strict vegetarian to respect the life around him and resolves to cause as little harm to other creatures as he can. There are several interesting mystical accounts within the book. For example, Hayy realizes that when he fasts and spins around in a circle, he feels a spiritual connection to what he believes is the creator. He achieves flashes of insight that he later struggles to convey, but still help to inform his overall system. As a result of these experiences, Hayy sets up a spiritual ascetic practice designed to trigger these flashes. In these moments, Hayy experiences a oneness with nature and God. After years of this quiet life on the island, Hayy comes across another person for the first time, a learned Muslim who thinks he has discovered the island. Once able to communicate, Hayy's interlocutor is stunned by the philosophical system Hayy developed. Most of all, he is profoundly moved by the degree to which Hayy's system resembled Islam, despite never reading the Quran. He soon realizes that Hayy has discovered the deeper truths that in fact underlie the Quran, and insists that he comes back to teach the Islamic theologians. Hayy eventually agrees, visiting the mainland for the first time. He is initially met with wonder as the theologians learn at his feet, but soon become suspicious of him. Hayy finds himself unable to convey insights he attained through his aesthetic practices. When he attempts to describe the union he experienced with God through these practices, the theologians become enraged. Hayy is unable to convince them of the truth in his revelation, and ultimately returns to his island to live out his days in solitude. The story of Hayy ibn Yaqzan is meant to be an allegory working on several levels. Its author, Ibn Tufayl, was a philosopher who wanted to contend that philosophy and science were not at odds with Islamic scripture. Hayy is a caricature of the philosopher-scientist who learns about the world through his own investigations without use of any inherited tradition. The theologians, on the other hand, are strict scripturalists. They learn about the world primarily through their inherited tradition. Hayy's interlocutor is able to understand that the system Hayy constructs is not at odds with that inherited tradition, but the theologians fail to see this. Their narrowness prevents them from seeing the richness of Hayy's insights and the ways it could enhance their own understanding of religion and God. To modern readers, though, it is the relationship between mysticism and philosophy that is truly puzzling. Hayy's philosophical investigations are merged with his spiritual insights. His philosophy is reminiscent of Aristotelian metaphysics. He focuses on necessity and causation, leading to his understanding of the creator and the universe. There are logical claims that he has no trouble teaching. His spiritual revelations, on the other hand, do not fall into what we would ordinarily consider philosophy. He lacks the words or concepts to convey these insights because they are not necessarily logical at all. They are the result of spiritual practices that closely resemble those of conventional Islam. He spins in circles, much like the whirling dervishes of Turkey. His fasts are similar to more traditional practices, but nonetheless are not parts of philosophical inquiry. Does this mean we should write this off as antithetical to philosophy? Or perhaps merely a quirk of Islamic philosophy? Perhaps once we come in with an open mind, we begin to see that the mystical elements at play here are actually not unique to the Islamic world. We see it time and time again in traditional philosophy as well. I's inability to convey his revelations are similar to the way Plato describes the philosopher who peers into reality, as he describes it in the allegory of the cave. In Plato's famous allegory, most of us look at the world like people chained to a cave, with flames lit behind us. On the wall of the cave, we see shadows of objects, but since these shadows are all we see, we take it to be what is real. Plato describes someone who manages to break free from the cave and gazes upon the sun. Once their eyes adjust, they see the world as it really is. Eventually, they come back to the cave to tell their fellow cave dwellers, only to find that they cannot explain any of what they've discovered. In fact, they can no longer see in the dark, so their fellow cave dwellers mock them as fools and idiots. Just like Plato's philosopher gains profound insight symbolized by flashes of light, only to be utterly unable to tell the world what they've learned. Once we open our eyes to it, this kind of mysticism appears over and over again in pre-modern philosophy, from Plato to Plotinus to Augustine. Mysticism and revelation play a key role in acquiring knowledge. Even Pythagoras, the famous mathematician, developed a sense of mysticism that drew him to create a math-worshipping cult. Well, today we see mysticism as opposed to philosophical inquiry. This just wasn't the case in the pre-modern world. Until we accept this, we can't fully appreciate our own philosophical tradition. More importantly, it prevents us from seeing the profound insights and values of non-Western philosophy. Accepting that philosophy wasn't always the domain of pure logic, but rather drew upon a wealth of different sources of knowledge, gives us a better appreciation for classical philosophy and allows us to take a more inclusive approach to the discipline.